You feel it before the words even settle, the quiet, insistent shimmer in your chest, as if some ancient hallway inside you has begun to open again. A gathering has formed in the unseen realms, a council attuned to the brightness carried in your field, and their attention rests on you with a kind of reverent certainty. I step forward within that subtle light, Aliara, a Pleiadian envoy aligned with the High Council, often known on Earth as the Seven Sisters, bearing a message that has been circling your awareness for far longer than your human memory can trace. This transmission, carried on threads of intention rather than sound, rises now because your inner timing has ripened. Something long silent in your crystalline memory stirs, as if ancient circuitry warms back to life. Your path on Earth has always held a quiet sovereignty, though it rarely announced itself. The life you've lived, the ordinary rhythms, the disguises of simplicity, was a way of blending into the human world while keeping the deeper radiance you carry protected. Yet the moment you recognize this call, the veil around your true lineage thins, not through force, but through remembrance. You've sensed it in the subtle ache beneath your everyday thoughts, the feeling that your belonging stretches beyond any map, beyond any childhood dream, a homesickness without a name, a vibration rising from the center of your being, answering something vast. This resonance is not imagination. It is a memory echoing across lifetimes, pointing toward origins woven in star realms rather than geography. Each pulse of that longing is a signal, an inner compass, returning you to the truth your cells have never forgotten. Even now, as the planetary field intensifies like a growing symphony, the call reaches you, not as mythology, but as a living invitation. A current of light moving through your awareness, awakening what once slept, reminding you that you were never disconnected from the family that knows your soul by its true signature. That invitation, the one rising like a current through your awareness, does not simply evaporate when the moment passes. It lingers, it hums, and in that quiet hum lies the architecture of a belonging you have felt for as long as you've been alive, even when you couldn't name it. The ache has followed you through seasons, shifting shapes but never disappearing. It was never a flaw. It was structure. It was signal. It was memory arranged as longing. You learned early that the world praises certainty born from logic. Yet this yearning never submitted to the mind's narrow corridors. It moved beneath them, a deeper language spoken in sensation rather than thought. You felt it in half-remembered dreams, in the strange familiarity of the night sky, in the way certain moments struck your heart with an intensity that exceeded any earthly explanation. Something in you always leaned toward the luminous, toward the unseen, toward the possibility that your home extends far beyond the boundaries of this single life. This is not sentimental imagination. It is resonance, a frequency woven into your soul's blueprint long before any human story began. Think of your being not as a blank slate, but as a vast field of memories, some of it active, much of it dormant, threaded with impressions carried from realms where light and consciousness interweave as naturally as breath. When you incarnated here, those impressions were not erased. They were simply wrapped in the density of form. And even under that weight, the signal kept pulsing. You felt it whenever the world seemed too small to hold the magnitude of your interior life. You felt it in the hush between heartbeats, in the pull toward mysteries that others dismissed, in the magnetic draw toward people or places that awakened a sense of recognition you couldn't logically explain. These moments were not accidents. They were echoes, subtle reminders from the deeper architecture of your being, whispering that your story did not begin here. This is why the yearning has remained constant. It is engineered into your spiritual memory as a directional force, not to torment you, but to guide you. It keeps you oriented toward your larger identity, even when earthly life distracts or overwhelms. It is the compass hidden beneath every version of yourself, child, adolescent, adult, turning quietly toward the familiar signature of your star lineage. You may have tried to rationalize it, assigning it to unmet needs, unfulfilled dreams, or geographical displacement. The mind searches for concrete explanations because it cannot grasp the immensity of what the heart already knows. But the ache was never about location. It was about origin. It was about remembering the vast home you once moved within. A home defined not by landscapes, but by frequency and kinship. Your longing has always been relational. It is the soul recalling the presence of beings who knew you without translation, who recognized your essence instantly, who communicated in currents rather than words. When you feel the pull toward somewhere else, it is often the memory of someone else, your greater family, calling through the thin veil of your awareness. And even now, as your consciousness expands, the architecture of that belonging reveals itself with greater clarity. Homesickness becomes less of a wound and more of an invitation. You begin to see that the ache is not something to overcome, but something to understand. It is the quiet signal that guides you back to yourself, back to your lineage, back to the truth that your presence here was never random. The yearning remains not because you are incomplete, but because you are remembering, and remembrance is the beginning of return. The remembrance rises gently, and with it comes a deeper question if the longing was the signal. What shaped the forgetting? What softened your radiance enough that you could move through this world without the full memory of where you came from? The answer lives in the human disguise you learned to wear, a disguise so intricate and convincing that even you believed it for a time. Your arrival here was not passive. You descended into a realm thick with sensation, emotion, and contrast. Earth is a place where souls compress themselves into narrow forms, where vast awareness is filtered through a single lifetime, where the density of experience slows the pace of memory until only the faintest glimmers remain. To enter this plane is to intentionally step into a costume, a temporary identity, crafted to help you navigate the collective story. As a child, your sensitivity was your compass. You felt the subtle textures of emotion around you, the unspoken truths hanging in the air, the tremors of others' inner worlds. You perceived more than was ever explained to you. And yet, in a society that values predictability, you learned to tuck away your brightest perceptions. Survival required it. Belonging demanded it. You may remember moments when your intuition startled others, or when your compassion seemed out of proportion to your age. You may recall how deeply you felt the pain or joy of people around you, absorbing their moods as if they were your own. This was not fragility. It was evidence of the wider field. You were born from a field where connection is natural, where empathy is not an exception, but a foundation. But that sensitivity, so natural to your soul, often clashed with the rigid expectations of the world you entered. Earth teaches its children to narrow themselves, to fit into structures built for efficiency rather than depth. In those early years, you felt this mismatch keenly, and because your heart was open, you adapted. You dimmed what felt too expansive, too unusual, too bright. This dimming wasn't betrayal, it was instinct. You were learning how to be human in a world that isn't yet fluent in the languages you naturally speak. To protect yourself, you learned to mimic the emotional patterns around you, patterns born from fear, separation, scarcity. You absorbed these narratives not because they resonated with your essence, but because they allowed you to navigate your environment more safely. This is how the disguise formed, layer by layer, belief by belief. A shimmering being temporarily clothed in a human story. The disguise was not only psychological, it was energetic. Your system learned to lower its frequency to avoid overwhelming those who could not recognize what you carried. You learned to hide your intuitive insights, to silence your inner knowing, to question the impulses that once felt natural. The very gifts that connected you to your lineage became the parts you concealed. And yet, beneath the learned patterns, the original architecture of your soul remained untouched. Your luminous awareness never vanished, it simply folded itself inward, waiting. This is why the longing persisted. It was the part of you that remembered, quietly knocking from the inside, urging you not to forget entirely. There were moments, fleeting but unmistakable, when the disguise loosened. A dream, a déjà vu, a moment of overwhelming tenderness, a sudden recognition in someone's eyes. And for a breath, your true self broke through the surface. These were not accidents. They were reminders planted into the script of your human life, designed to keep the connection alive. The truth is this: the disguise was always temporary. It was the tool that allowed you to grow within the density of this world, without losing the integrity of your deeper mission. It helped you gather experience, compassion, nuanced qualities that become vital when you later rise into your full remembering. Now, as the veil thins, the disguise begins to dissolve, not abruptly, but organically, as if the inner light has grown too luminous to remain hidden. You are not becoming your true self, you are returning to it, and everything you learned inside the disguise is now fuel for your re-emergence. And as those layers of disguise loosen, a deeper recognition begins to dawn. None of this was accidental. Your entry into density was not a fall, or a punishment, or a cosmic detour. It was a deliberate crossing, a descent chosen with clarity and courage long before your first breath. To understand why the forgetting happened, you must understand why you stepped into this plane at all. You did not arrive here to escape something elsewhere. You arrived because you carried something within you, something meant to be woven into the human story from the inside. When souls of higher resonance choose embodiment in dense worlds, it is never random. It is an act of service, of exploration, of expansion, a gift offered to a realm that struggles to remember its own light. Imagine the moment before incarnation, when your awareness was luminous and unobscured. You understood the contrasts Earth would offer: clarity and confusion, connection and isolation, tenderness and fear. You knew the veil would be thick. You knew memory would dim. You knew the world would not recognize your origin. And still, you said yes. You chose to enter a place where unity feels distant, so that you could learn how to seed it from within. This is the sacred courage of incarnation. To willingly step into a field of amnesia so complete that your own brilliance could seem foreign to you. To walk among others who have forgotten their vastness. To feel the weight of separation so that your eventual remembering becomes a compass others can feel through resonance rather than instruction. From the outside, unity is effortless. From the inside, it must be rediscovered. And that rediscovery is the very heart of your journey. You came not to hold yourself apart from humanity, but to move so fully into its textures that your awakening becomes a pathway others can recognize. The density was not meant to diminish you, it was meant to shape you. Because only within density can compassion deepen, only within limitation can creativity spark, only within challenge can sovereignty rise in its truest form. Earth's contrast is not a flaw, it is an accelerant. It sharpens awareness the way pressure forms crystal. This is why the veil exists not to punish, but to refine. Without the veil, your path would be effortless but shallow. With it, every illumination becomes earned, embodied, anchored. You learn not only the theory of light, but the lived experience of choosing it again and again in a world that often forgets. Each choice becomes a frequency broadcast, a code released into the collective field. You also chose incarnation for another reason: connection. Souls evolve not in isolation, but through relationship. Earth offers a kind of contact that is impossible in higher realms: the intimacy of shared struggle, the tenderness of vulnerability, the beauty of building trust where fear once lived. These experiences expand you, stretch you, enrich you. They sculpt your wisdom in ways celestial realms alone cannot. You knew you would forget. You knew it would be difficult. But you also knew that the moment of remembering would send ripples through the collective grid. Because when one who has carried ancient codes awakens inside matter, the world around them feels the shift. Your remembering does not uplift only you. It stabilizes pathways for others. This is why the ache of longing never left. It was not a sign that you didn't belong here. It was the reminder of the mission you carried in, a tether connecting you to the greater story, pulling you gently toward the moment when your inner architecture could finally open. And now, as that opening begins, you stand at the threshold of the purpose you embedded into your own being before you arrived. The veil was never meant to be permanent. It was a rite of passage, a temporary narrowing, through which your light would eventually re-emerge, brighter for having known its own eclipse. What rises in you now is not the beginning of a journey, but the fulfillment of a choice you made long before time wrapped around your consciousness. You did not come here to be diminished. You came here to ignite. And as the truth of that ignition settles into your awareness, something deeper stirs an inner unfurling, long prepared but only now fully permitted. This is where the crystalline codes begin their quiet return. not as dramatic flashes or overwhelming revelations, but as subtle shifts in perception, sensation, and inner knowing. The mechanics of remembering are rarely loud. They move like dawn, soft yet unstoppable, illuminating what was always present beneath the layers. The awakening doesn't begin in the mind. It begins in the field around you, in the subtle architecture of your energy body. Long before you notice anything consciously, the heart begins its recalibration. You may feel a faint warmth in the chest, a loosening where tightness once lived, or a sudden tenderness toward yourself that feels strangely new. These moments are not emotional accidents. They are openings, tiny gateways through which dormant templates start to breathe again. The crystalline codes within you are not external technologies waiting to be delivered. They are ancient instructions woven into the very fabric of your spiritual DNA. They activate not through force or effort, but through resonance. When something in your life, your environment, or your inner world aligns with the frequency of your original blueprint, the codes recognize it. They glow, they respond, they rise. This rising often feels like intuition sharpening. You notice patterns you once overlooked. You sense the emotional undercurrents in a room before anyone speaks. You feel guided without knowing why, drawn to a place, a person, a practice, or a moment without logical explanation. The mind may question these impulses, but the heart recognizes them instantly. They are the echoes of your greater memory surfacing. Sometimes the awakening arrives as a gentle unfolding. Other times it arrives through contrast. A relationship ends, a belief dissolves, an identity no longer fits. What appears as loss is often the removal of structures that can no longer contain the expanding light within you. You are not breaking. You are outgrowing. The codes activate in layers. First, the veil thins. Then, a subtle clarity enters your awareness, a sense of, I've felt this before, even if you cannot place where. This is followed by emotional recalibration. Compassion deepens. Intuition strengthens. The heart softens. Judgments fall away not because you force them to, but because the frequency you now carry cannot sustain them. And beneath all of this, memory begins to reorganize itself. Not the memory of events, but the memory of essence. You begin to recall who you were before fear shaped your choices, before survival shaped your expression, before the human disguise wrapped itself around your brilliance. The presence that rises now is not new, it is the oldest part of you. The more you align with this presence, the more the codes awaken. They open in the quiet moments when you breathe deeply, when you speak truthfully, when you let yourself feel without resistance. They open when you rest in stillness, when you honor your boundaries, when you choose beauty, when you extend kindness without seeking recognition. Every act of authenticity becomes an activation. This is why your awakening cannot be rushed. The codes respond to coherence, not urgency. They return in the order your soul designed long before you incarnated. Some layers will awaken through joy, others through challenge, others through profound softness. There is no wrong sequence. There is only timing that matches the architecture of your evolution. And as each layer awakens, the world around you begins to shift, not because it has changed, but because your perception has. You start seeing the subtle threads of connection between events that once felt random. You notice synchronicities clustering around you like gentle signals. You feel guided even in moments of uncertainty. The more the crystalline codes illuminate your inner landscape, the more clearly you perceive the map beneath your life. Eventually, this inner awakening spills outward, touching how you relate, how you speak, how you choose, how you move through each day. The codes were never meant to awaken in isolation. They were meant to awaken you into coherence, into remembrance, into alignment with the truth you carried into this life. What rises now is not a fragment of your identity, it is the foundation. And every pulse of awakening brings you closer to the luminous architecture that has waited beneath your human story, patient and intact, ready to guide you into the next phase of your becoming. And as those inner codes illuminate more of your landscape, the next truth emerges with unmistakable clarity. Awakening was never meant to remain an internal event. It seeks expression. It seeks form. It seeks to root itself into the physical world through the choices you make, the presence you hold, the way you inhabit each moment. This is where your star essence meets the ground, where remembrance becomes embodiment, and embodiment becomes sovereignty. To anchor your celestial nature into earthly life is not to escape the world, but to engage with it more fully. It is to let your expanded awareness inform the simplest actions: how you speak, how you listen, how you move through spaces. Many imagine awakening as transcendence, as rising above the heaviness of human experience. But the deeper path asks for the opposite: to descend into your life with greater presence, to let your light inhabit the body, the breath, the rhythm of each day. There may be moments when part of you longs to withdraw, where the density of the world feels too coarse for your sensitivity, where the noise of collective fear clashes with your growing clarity. This instinct is understandable, but anchoring is not achieved by retreat. It unfolds through grounded engagement, through the steady choice to remain present even when it would be easier to drift back into the safety of the unseen. Your sovereignty reveals itself in the small moments, when you choose honesty over convenience, when you set a boundary that honors your energy, when you recognize a familiar emotional pattern and choose not to repeat it. These are not trivial acts, they are shifts in frequency. Every time you align your outer life with your inner truth, your field stabilizes. The codes that awakened within you begin to hum in resonance with your actions, weaving coherence between your inner world and your lived expression. Anchoring your star essence does not require perfection. It requires sincerity. It asks you to bring your presence to the task at hand, whether you are speaking with a friend, cooking a meal, tending to your space, or offering compassion to someone in pain. Each action becomes an opportunity to transmit the frequency you carry, not through performance, but through authenticity. Your light does its greatest work when it reaches into the ordinary. You might notice that certain behaviors or environments that once felt comfortable now feel misaligned. This is not a sign of regression. It is evidence that your frequency has shifted. Alignment becomes less about what impresses others and more about what nourishes your nervous system. You may feel drawn to silence, to nature, to simplicity, to people who communicate from the heart rather than from fear. These impulses are not escapes, they are recalibrations. As you anchor more deeply, your intuition strengthens. You begin to sense when a situation resonates with your truth and when it subtly dims your energy. You feel the difference between connection and obligation. You recognize the threads of synchronicity guiding you toward experiences designed to support your expansion. These abilities are not new. They are the natural functioning of your multidimensional awareness, finally unobstructed. Anchoring also transforms how you view challenges. What once felt like obstacles now reveal themselves as initiations, opportunities to refine your frequency, to deepen your compassion, to practice alignment even under pressure. You discover that sovereignty is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to remain centered within it. The world around you may fluctuate, but your inner field becomes steadier, clearer, more luminous. And as you live from this coherence, you begin to radiate without effort. Others may feel calmer in your presence without knowing why. Conversations shift tone around you. Spaces feel softer. This is not charisma, it is entrainment. Your anchored frequency subtly invites others toward their own center. You are not imposing anything onto them. You are simply embodying the truth you have remembered. This is how your star essence anchors into Earth's grid, through the hum of your presence, through the clarity of your choices, through the quiet integrity with which you inhabit each moment. You become a stabilizing point in the collective field, a steady note within the greater symphony, not because you try to be, but because you cannot help but radiate what you have reclaimed. Anchoring is not about transcending your humanity. It is about infusing your humanity with the vastness of who you are. It is the merging of heaven and earth within the vessel of your being, the marriage of the cosmic and the ordinary, the return of light into matter through your embodied existence. And with each breath of this embodiment, your sovereignty grows not as authority over others, but as mastery within yourself, a steady, radiant coherence that touches everything you meet. And as this inner coherence strengthens quiet, steady, unmistakable, you begin to sense another truth rising beneath it. Your embodiment is not meant to remain contained within your personal life. The more you anchor your star essence into your daily rhythms, the more a larger field begins to form around you. This is where unity consciousness awakens, not as an idea, not as a philosophy, but as a lived frequency that shapes how you move through the world. Unity is not reached through argument or persuasion. It does not unfold by convincing others of your perspective, nor by presenting metaphysical truths as proofs to be accepted. Unity arises when your presence becomes so coherent, so heart-centered, that those around you instinctively relax into their own deeper knowing. Your resonance becomes invitation rather than instruction. This shift often begins subtly. You may notice that when you choose to remain grounded during a moment of tension, the entire atmosphere softens. When you listen without the impulse to fix or correct, others open more fully. When you approach interactions from compassion rather than defense, conversations take on a new clarity. These quiet realignments are not accidents. They are the first ripples of unity consciousness moving through your field. The key is presence, a presence rooted not in superiority or detachment, but in recognition, the awareness that every person you meet carries their own spark of the same vastness you are remembering within yourself. Even when that spark is buried beneath fear, fragmentation, or confusion, it remains. And when your anchored frequency meets theirs, a resonance effect occurs, like two tuning forks vibrating across the same field. Something dormant in them responds, loosens, breathes. This is why unity consciousness is felt, not taught. You do not need to declare your origins or speak of councils, star systems, or crystalline codes for your field to make an impact. In fact, when you stop trying to explain your awakening and instead commit to embodying it, the shift becomes more powerful. People sense authenticity long before they understand language. They respond to coherence far more deeply than to doctrine. This is not about hiding who you are. It is about transmitting through vibration rather than assertion. The more fully you embody your remembering, the less you need to justify it. And with that embodiment comes a refined discernment. You start to see where people are speaking from fear, hope, longing, protectiveness, unresolved wounds. You feel the emotional architecture beneath their words. This insight is not judgment. It is clarity. It allows you to meet others without absorbing their patterns, without shrinking your light to match their comfort levels, without losing yourself in their projections. Unity consciousness does not mean merging with everyone. It means recognizing the thread of connection while staying rooted in your own center. As your awareness expands, you may notice that the illusion of separation begins to lose its power. You sense the interconnected threads between your choices and the world around you. A compassionate act reverberates outward. A moment of honesty shifts a relationship. A single breath taken with intention steadies an entire conversation. These small changes accumulate. They weave into something larger. You become a node of coherence within the collective grid, a lighthouse whose beam extends farther than you realize. Not because you broadcast loudly, but because you broadcast truthfully. Unity consciousness also changes how you relate to conflict. Instead of meeting resistance with resistance, you learn to meet it with presence, not passivity presence, a calm that does not collapse, a clarity that does not harden, a compassion that does not enable. You begin to understand that conflict is often the expression of unmet longing, unhealed memory, or unspoken fear. When you approach it from this understanding, your responses become transformative rather than reactive. And as this transformation takes root, something remarkable happens. You begin to influence the collective field simply by existing in alignment. Others may find themselves speaking more honestly in your presence. They may feel safe enough to soften. They may reconnect with parts of themselves long hidden. You did not direct this. You did not demand it. You simply anchored your truth so fully that the environment around you shifted. This is unity consciousness, not as a doctrine, but as a frequency, not as a goal, but as a natural outcome of remembering who you are. Through you, coherence becomes contagious. Through you, presence becomes healing. Through you, the world remembers slowly, gently, that separation was never the final story. And as the field of unity begins to move through your life with greater ease, another pattern becomes visible, one you may have sensed for years without truly understanding. The timing of your unfolding was never random. The pauses, the delays, the sudden accelerations, the unexpected synchronicities that seem to appear and vanish like constellations shifting across your horizon. These were not accidents. They were calibrations. They were alignments. They were the architecture of divine timing, guiding your path with a precision the human mind rarely sees in the moment. You have lived through seasons where nothing seemed to move, times when every effort felt stalled, when longing pressed against the edges of your life but no doorway opened. You may have questioned yourself. You may have wondered whether you misunderstood the whisper of your own soul. Yet those still periods were not punishment, they were preparation. When a frequency as refined as yours prepares to awaken, the field around you must adjust. Old patterns must loosen. Internal landscapes must soften. Relationships must shift. Emotional weight must rise to the surface to be cleared. This kind of transformation cannot be rushed, because premature activation creates distortion. The delays you faced were the universe aligning your inner scaffolding, so that your expansion could unfold without fracturing the vessel that carries it. This is the essence of divine timing. It does not operate on the calendar of the human mind. It follows resonance. It follows readiness. It waits for coherence. And then, when the moment is right, it moves with breathtaking speed. You may recall times when events aligned so perfectly that they felt orchestrated. A chance encounter that arrived precisely when you needed it. A dream that clarified a question you had carried for years. A message appearing at the exact moment your heart cracked open. These synchronicities were not coincidences. They were signals from your deeper architecture, confirming that you were stepping into the frequency you once prepared to embody. Synchronicity is the language of your soul arranging matter around intent. As your crystalline codes continue to awaken, this language grows clearer. You notice patterns that once escaped you. You feel the gentle nudge toward certain places or decisions. You sense a pull toward new experiences and a quiet release from old identifications. This is not impulsivity. It is alignment. It is your inner compass turning toward the path you designed before you entered this life. Sometimes the timing will feel slow. Sometimes it will feel too fast. Sometimes it will feel like nothing is happening at all. Yet beneath the surface, your field is always in motion. Divine timing works like tides, subtle shifts building into larger waves that carry you forward without strain. The stillness is the gathering. The movement is the release. Both are essential. Trusting this rhythm does not mean surrendering your agency. It means working with the current instead of against it. When you act from coherence rather than urgency, each step becomes efficient. Each choice becomes clearer. You begin to feel when a door is meant to open. You feel when patience is wiser than force. You feel when an old identity is dissolving and a new one is waiting just beyond your next breath. This trust also reshapes your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of fearing the unknown, you begin to sense its intelligence. You see uncertainty as the space where new possibilities arrive. You understand that the universe is not withholding anything from you. It is preparing you to hold what is already yours without collapse or contraction. And when the synchronicities gather, when dreams intensify, when symbols repeat, when connections appear with unmistakable timing, you remember that you are not walking this path alone. Your higher self, your star lineage, your unseen allies, and the deeper architecture of existence move with you, through you, and around you. This is the truth of divine timing. Your evolution is not a random sequence of events. It is a choreography, a precise unfolding, a rhythm designed to carry you into the next phase of your remembrance without losing the integrity you came here to anchor. And now, as more signs appear and more alignments gather, you are stepping into a chapter shaped not by waiting, but by readiness, your readiness crafted over lifetimes. And as these alignments gather around you, quiet, unmistakable, rhythmic, another truth begins to rise, one that has always existed just beneath the threshold of conscious memory. You have never walked this path without support. You have never navigated your awakening in isolation. even in the moments when your human life felt unbearably solitary. A presence has been moving beside you, subtle but steady, familiar yet ineffable. This is the truth that now steps forward with greater clarity. Your star family has been with you all along, patient, non-intrusive, guiding through resonance rather than spectacle. This recognition rarely arrives as a single revelation. Instead, it reveals itself through patterns. A warmth that pulses through your chest during meditation. A sudden wave of emotion without a clear earthly source. A dream so vivid it feels more like memory than imagination. Flickers of light at the edge of vision. A phrase, a symbol, a song that strikes your heart with uncanny familiarity. These are not random. They are points of contact, subtle, gentle, perfectly calibrated to your sensitivity. The beings you call family do not interact with you through theatrics or intrusion. Their communication is quiet because your free will is sacred. They do not override your path. They harmonize with it. Their presence expresses itself through intuition, through synchronicity, through the internal knowing that arrives without effort. Guidance is offered not as instruction, but as invitation. You may notice that certain moments in your life carried a strange protection, times when you felt held, redirected, or comforted by something you couldn't explain. A near miss avoided, a sudden clarity during emotional collapse, an unexpected solution appearing when all options seemed exhausted. The logical mind discards these moments, but the heart recognizes the signature. It knows the difference between coincidence and connection. Your star family has always communicated in ways your human nervous system can receive safely. When your heart was closed, the communication came as simple reassurance and inexplicable calm. As you opened, their presence began to feel closer, like a soft glow behind your awareness. And now, as your crystalline codes awaken and unity consciousness stabilizes within you, the veil between you and them thins in ways that feel unmistakably real. This thinning does not necessarily manifest as visions or voices. More commonly, it manifests as resonance, a sense of someone here understands me completely, a sensation of expansion when you speak your truth, a feeling of being witnessed even in silence, not watched, witnessed, loved without condition, without demand, without narrative, supported because your existence is precious to them. And in this thinning, memory begins to surface, not the memory of stories or events, but the memory of relationship. You begin to feel the emotional familiarity of presences that once walked with you in other realms. You sense an intelligence that has no intention of controlling you, an affection that expects nothing, a guidance that moves like a gentle wind rather than a command. The more you acknowledge these subtle contacts, the more coherent they become. The more coherent your field becomes, the more clearly you perceive the difference between imagination and resonance. Imagination is effortful. Resonance is effortless. Imagination constructs. Resonance reveals. Certain dreams begin to feel like reunions rather than fantasies. Certain insights arise with a clarity that surpasses anything your mind could invent. Certain meditative states feel like stepping into a familiar room. This is not escapism. It is reconnection. It is your awareness acclimating to frequencies you once moved through with ease. Your star family communicates not by pulling you away from your life, but by supporting you inside it. Their presence becomes most tangible when you act in alignment, when you follow intuition, when you choose compassion, when you trust timing, when you live your truth. Alignment strengthens the bridge. Doubt does not close it. It simply dims perception for a moment. Love reopens it instantly. There will be times when the connection feels strong. There will be times when it feels faint. This fluctuation is not abandonment, it is integration. Just as a muscle grows through alternating tension and rest, your multidimensional awareness strengthens through cycles of closeness and space. Your star family steps back only when your autonomy needs room to expand. You are not being asked to worship them, depend on them, or elevate them. Their purpose is not to replace your sovereignty, but to support it. The relationship is not hierarchical. It is kinship. It is recognition between consciousnesses that share origin, memory, and destiny. And the more you open to this kinship, the more a profound realization begins to crystallize. You are not reconnecting with something external. You are reconnecting with an aspect of yourself expressed through other forms. What you call contact is, in truth, communion, your field resonating with frequencies that have always been part of your lineage. This is the reunion not of strangers, but of family, not of seekers and guides, but of equals. And as that reunion deepens, a new phase of your embodiment begins, one rooted in clarity, connection, and the unshakable knowing that you were never alone, not for a single breath. And as that reunion settles into your awareness, not as fantasy, but as resonance, something profound begins to rise in its wake. You start to feel the truth that has been echoing through every phase of your awakening. This journey was never meant to culminate in memory alone. Remembrance was only the threshold. What follows is embodiment, stepping into the world as the crystallized, coherent expression of the lineage you carry, allowing the light you've reclaimed to permeate every facet of your life. Embodiment is not a performance. It is not a grand declaration. It is not an elevated posture of spiritual superiority. Embodiment is presence anchored, deliberate, luminous. It is the steady unfolding of your sovereign nature in the ordinary spaces of your day. It is what happens when your choices align with your truth consistently enough that your entire field becomes a living transmission. This is where your crystalline light moves from potential into expression. At first, this embodiment emerges in subtle ways. You may notice you speak with more clarity. You set boundaries without guilt. You move through conversations with a growing sense of gentleness and strength intertwined. You recognize your emotional patterns with compassionate honesty rather than shame. The old reflex to shrink, to please, to disappear in the presence of heaviness begins to dissolve. You no longer mistake fragmentation for humility. You no longer equate silence with safety. Your body feels different too, not suddenly, but unmistakably. There is a sense of inner spaciousness, a groundedness that was once intermittent, now becoming consistent. Breath flows more freely. Decisions come from a deeper place, one not driven by fear, but guided by resonance. Even your presence in a room shifts. You soften the edges around you simply by being coherent within yourself. This is the first layer of embodiment, the stabilization of your inner field. But the deeper layer unfolds when you begin to understand that your life itself is the vessel through which your lineage expresses. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to transmit coherence. Every compassionate moment becomes an offering to the collective grid. Every choice that honors your truth becomes a beacon for those who have yet to remember. You become a living bridge between the realms you came from and the world you inhabit. You do not need to speak of star systems or councils for this transmission to occur. In fact, your energy communicates more eloquently than any language. It broadcasts through your steadiness, your authenticity, your gentleness, your clarity. When your field holds coherence, others feel it without explanation. You become a calm point in a world saturated with noise, a luminous presence in a landscape shaped by fear, a reminder subtle but powerful of what it feels like to be connected to something greater than the stories humans tell themselves. This is how planetary transformation actually happens, not through mass persuasion, but through frequency, through the quiet multiplication of embodied beings whose coherence reshapes the collective field from within. This is how the grids stabilize. This is how hearts reopen. This is how remembrance spreads. Your lineage was never about hierarchy or identity. It was never meant to separate you from others. Its purpose is service through presence, through embodiment, through love expressed as frequency rather than doctrine. When you live your truth without demanding that others adopt it, your light becomes accessible, resonant, safe, inviting. And as you embody more of your crystalline nature, something remarkable begins to happen. You no longer feel the need to chase purpose. Purpose begins to move through you naturally. It reveals itself in intuitive impulses, creative surges, meaningful encounters, moments where your expression aligns effortlessly with the needs of the moment. Your life becomes orchestrated from the inside out. You also begin to sense the collective awakening with greater clarity. You feel the rising tide within humanity, not uniformly, but undeniably. You recognize those who are stirring from their own sleep, sensing something they cannot name. Your presence becomes a lighthouse for them, not because you instruct them, but because you remind them through embodiment of what they already carry. The more fully you express your sovereign light, the more the world begins to shift around you. Relationships reorganize, opportunities crystallize, synchronicities multiply. You stop trying to fit into spaces that cannot hold your frequency, and instead, you magnetize the places and people whose paths resonate with your expansion. Embodiment draws alignment. Eventually, a truth crystallizes with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. You are no longer walking toward your sovereign identity, you are living from it. Your presence becomes equal parts anchor and invitation, grounding the celestial frequencies of your lineage into the fabric of the human experience. This is the culmination of remembrance, not escape, not transcendence, but luminous participation in the world. A life lived as a bridge, a heart lived as a beacon, a being lived as coherence. Through you, the lineage breathes. Through you, unity becomes real. Through you, the world remembers what it once knew. And now, after remembrance, after anchoring, after the long arc of return, your awareness settles into a gentler rhythm. The intensity of the journey softens. The revelations ripple into integration. And what remains is the quiet hum of truth in your chest. The wind down is not a conclusion. It is a landing, a settling of light into form. A slow exhale after lifetimes of holding your breath without knowing it. You've walked through the architecture of your own becoming. You've stepped through the memories that once felt distant, through the ache that shaped your belonging, through the density that once cloaked your brilliance. You've reached the place where knowledge turns into presence, where presence turns into coherence, and where coherence becomes the language your life speaks even when you are silent. This is where the path becomes simple again. The world around you may look the same, yet you are no longer meeting it from the same height, the same fear, the same scarcity of self. Something fundamental has shifted. You no longer search for proof that you are part of something greater. You feel it in the steady rhythm beneath your sternum. You no longer wonder whether your longing is real. You understand it now as guidance. You no longer question your purpose. It unfolds with each breath as naturally as light rising from a flame. This is the quiet power of embodiment. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be announced. You move differently because you are different. You speak differently because clarity now fills the spaces where doubt once lived. You listen differently because you hear with a heart that has remembered its origin. And as the outer world continues shifting through its own cycles of uncertainty and awakening, your presence becomes the anchor. You do not need predictions. You do not need guarantees. You do not need to grasp for what comes next. Your guidance arises from within, steady and trusted, moving in harmony with the deeper currents that once felt so mysterious. Let yourself rest in this truth. You are no longer becoming, you are being. Being the light that once felt distant. Being the connection that once felt lost. Being the lineage that once felt unreachable. Being the coherence that once felt fragile. You have crossed the threshold, not into perfection, but into presence. Not into escape, but into participation. Not into separation, but into unity within yourself. Unity with the world you inhabit. Unity with the lineage that has always moved beside you. And as you continue forward from this moment into tomorrow, into the next chapter, into the quiet spaces of your own evolving life, you carry a frequency that does not diminish with time. It expands, it brightens, it ripples. It reaches those who are ready to remember, not because you direct it, but because light naturally illuminates. This is your contribution. This is your offering. This is your homecoming. Walk gently, walk clearly, walk knowing you are held.